Maximizing collaboration and productivity, Azure DevOps and Databricks pipeline. This is part of two series of sessions where we are going to discuss how do we use Azure DevOps and Databricks pipelines together to maximize the collaboration and productivity. In the part one of the session, which is this session, we are going to discuss about the build pipeline. Part two of the session, we are going to discuss the release pipelines. So let's get started. Hello friends, welcome to my channel and explore the world of Microsoft Azure. My name is Rajneesh Kaushik and I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, consultant and an enterprise architect. For more latest videos and blogs, you can always log into my website rajneeshkaushik.com and subscribe to my blog. Please do not forget to subscribe my channel and click the bell icon so you don't miss the latest videos. Do like, share and comment. Okay, so here is the agenda. First, we are going to learn about the CI/CD with Databricks and Azure DevOps. Then we will understand how do we develop a code and commit the code into the GitHub. Then we will start building the build pipeline, which essentially starts from creating a VM, installing the Python tool and Databricks Connect. Not just installing but configuring the Databricks Connect. Then we will understand how do we copy the files from Git Repo and run the unit test onto it. How do we create a Python wheel and package it in the tar file. Then how do we add the different unit tests source files into that repository. How to add the Python wheel packaging script to the repo. And then finally how to add the notebook so that this notebook can be ran inside the build pipeline. So how do we add this notebook into the repo? So let's understand what is CI/CD with Databricks and Azure DevOps. So this is CI/CD is nothing but continuous integration and continuous delivery. So when you do continuous integration, which means that first you are going to develop a code, and when you develop a code, you need to run a unit tests on the Azure Databricks notebook. Okay, and essentially this code is being developed in the IDE like VS Code or JetBrains IntelliJ. Then you will run this manually, these tests, and then finally the tests are cleared. Then you will commit the code and then finally test it with the branch. So this is your coding part. Once the coding is done, then you are going to build this code, right? So what you will do, you will gather the new and the updated code. That means the code which is already there in the Git along with your code, and then you will run the automated test. Once the automated tests are ran successfully, then you will build the libraries and the Apache Spark code, right, along with the notebook, and then that will be part of your build process. Once everything is built, you are going to create a artifact, which artifact will be used for the release pipeline. So this is your continuous integration part. Continuous delivery, what we do, when we develop this part, we actually deploy the notebooks as a part of this whole process. We deploy the notebooks, we deploy the Python wheel libraries. If you are using Scala, you are going to deploy the jar libraries, test the code with automated testing, and then report these results. And we'll do the programmatically scheduling this data engineering, analytics and machine learning workflows. So this is an overall process. So part of this process, which is very important, is how do we code and build this so that the release pipeline can take these artifacts. So whenever you develop a code and then you commit this code into the GitHub, actually we can create a script. And for the ease of understanding, I have actually divided this script into multiple steps, which is 6 steps essentially. And I'm going to explain you what this each step does. So either you can run these steps in a script, okay, or you can follow the same thing in your IDE, whatever is suitable for you. So let's understand. First, you are going to check out the desired branch, like the branch where you are working, your feature branch. Then you will pull the new changes from the remote branches, right, the branch which you are working on. Then you will export your notebook, okay, in or your from the Azure Databricks workspace, because wherever which workspace you are connected to, you are going to export the code from that workspace, okay. And this is nothing but a Databricks CLI command. So you will export the code and notebook, because essentially in the workspace there will be a couple of notebooks, right? And this is a CLI command for that. Then you will create a commit message, okay? And this is a commit message. You can change this commit message based on your requirement or your standards. Then you will add this updated code which you are developing today, the latest code you are going to add, and commit it with a commit message, right? Which you have, you are trying to create here. And then you will push this code. So this is essentially the overall script. You can run this script in one shot, and this will do the job for you for develop. Obviously you are developing this code in the in your IDE of choice like IntelliJ or Visual Studio, but this is essentially the code which you will use to commit your code into the GitHub. So now let's focus on creating the pipeline, which is build pipeline. So the first and foremost step in the build pipeline is to create a VM in the Azure DevOps and then install the Python tools into it. So in the Azure DevOps pipeline, we have a YML, and this is very easy that you can use any VM. Like in this example, we are using Ubuntu 20.04 VM image, but you can use any other image depending upon the Databricks runtime, right? So in this example, if you see, the image should be matching with one of the Databricks cluster. Like for example, Databricks runtime 10.4 LTS is using, then we have to use this 20.04.4 LTS, which essentially maps to the 20.04 virtual machine. So whatever cluster runtime you are using, based on that you need to choose the VM here. So in this case we have chosen the VM image Ubuntu. Then what is the next step? The next step is to deploy your Python, because all this thing works in the Databricks on the Python. So first you need to deploy the Python, and for this we have a task use Python version, and in this case we are using Python 3.8. and again this depends upon the version which your Databricks is using, right? So this is a correct version, and this should match with your Azure Databricks cluster. So it should not happen that your cluster is using 3.10 and you are using 3.8 here. Then you will face issue, because essentially this particular Python version you are going to use to compile your code and then push this binaries into the cluster at the target. So if there is a mismatch there, then this is a problem. Then the next step will be to deploy important Python libraries like PyTest, which is used for testing purpose, request, setup tool, wheel, and then we will also deploy the Databricks Connect. Okay, so what is this? Let's understand that. First, what is PyTest? PyTest is a Python testing framework which allows you to write and run the automated testing for Python. Like there are different features in this, like creating a fixtures, parameterization, discovery, and different plugins. That makes it very easy for your unit testing framework to work. So that is how the PyTest is used. Request is again a very popular Python library for making the HTTP request, so that you can use the REST API call with the use the API calls. Setup tool is again a Python library which is easy, which makes it very easy for us to package your Python code into the distributable. Okay, it contains the setup.py script which helps you to define the metadata. Metadata means like the name, version, and author and dependencies, so that when you do the setup, it automatically collects the dependencies and compile your code, right? So this also, you can also use the different kind of what kind of files it will be used for the when you distribute your package, like source code, documentation, test file, right? So this is how the whole setup tool works, and we will see it in the next upcoming slides how setup tool will be used, right? So once the setup tool completes the, like you use this tool, it actually pips out the compiled code that can be deployed into the machine. Wheel is nothing but a Python wheel, okay, which is a specific set of library in Python which is used for Python packages, right? So it helps you to faster installation of packages because you don't have to compile the code on the machine, right? And it is nothing but a zip file, okay, that contains the whole compiled code along with the metadata, which actually describes the package. It is something like in the Windows Word you might have heard about the DLL, similar kind of thing. It is a wheel, right? And this can be definitely installed with the help of pip command, okay, which is a standard Python manager. So if you see these things, we are actually these libraries we are actually installing here, right? Now here we are going to deploy the Databricks Connect. Databricks Connect is a tool which helps you to connect to the Databricks cluster from your desktop. So we need to definitely install this tool, and in order to deploy this tool we need to have these different variables set up, and these variables are Databricks workspace address, Databricks token, cluster ID, org ID and port, and we will see these things in great detail when we go to the demo part. And once you have this, then you are going to pass this information into the Databricks Connect configure command, and this is going to configure your Databricks Connect. So now you have all the tools installed. Now what you will do, the next step is to copy these files from the Git repository to the VM. The VM which we have created, which is nothing but a Ubuntu VM. So for that, in Azure DevOps, the checkout self, which means you are going to download the file from the remote Git repository and into the build agent. So that your build agent is nothing but your Ubuntu. So you are going to download and download it into the build agent. Then the second step is you are going to run the unit test on the Python code, which is downloaded here, and publish the test result. For this, we are going to use a simple script, okay, and this script, this is a standard format for running a Python test, and this is Python m pytest. Pytest is the same library which we have already installed, and this is the JUnit XML file path, and this is going to create this XML file in this particular path. Here the build repository.local path is a variable where it is coming from on the build local path, and then it is going to create a XML file with the test local.xml. And in the same way, these are also going to use this syntax for test.py. Okay, so test.py is your testing Python module, right? And this is what it's going to use the unit testing framework for that. Okay, so the output of this will be actually test local.xml file. Once this output is coming, then the next task we are going to publish the test result, and the test result is the same test.xml file, test local.xml file. We are going to publish these test results. So this is for publishing these test results. So now you have already ran the Python test. Now the next step would be to copy this tar file. Okay, so there will be this tar file which is getting created, and what we are going to do, we are going to collect or create a deployment artifact. Okay, and the deployment artifact we are going to publish into the artifact repository, so that our release pipeline can take this artifact and then push it into the release pipeline. So this is the two steps. So first is this task where we are going to use this root folder, and we are going to archive this. That means we are going to create a zip file from this directory, and this is the name of the zip file, which is a build id.zip. And then once that is done, then we are going to publish this build artifact into as a artifact name Databricks build artifact, and publish it as this Databricks build artifact. So before we go too far into it, let's understand how do we add the unit test source files to the repository. So for the sake of simplicity, we have developed these three files. First is add call.py, which is nothing but adding a column into the Python data frame. So here if you see, it is actually the data frame is passed, and it is going to add the particular column into it, df with column. And then this is your add column Python file, and this is your fixture for the test PyTest, And this fixture, what it does is it creates a source for a data set where the values are given Pete, Pan, Pete, and then email ID, Jason, and then his email ID and his last name. And this is your creating a data frame, and these are the header for this data frame. So once you have this source data frame, and then you are going to create a expected data. Expected data is, this is your expected data. Okay, this is your source data coming from outside, right? And then what it will do, it will create a data frame, and it is going to compare the expected result from the actual result. If expected result and actual results are true, that means matching, then this test is passed. If it is not matching, then this test will be failed. Okay. And then finally, what we are going to do, we are going to use the setup tools. And if you remember that we have done the setup tools library. So this library actually does, what it does is, it's going to enable the build agent, and in that build agent you are going to use setup tool library, okay, which gives this value to the release pipeline, right? And this is how it works. So setup.py file, and we are going to copy the setup.py file into this location, library/python/dbx demo folder. Okay, and I am going to show you where it is going to be copied. Why it is required? Because actually this setup tool library will actually create a wheel which will be directly used by the release pipeline. Without release pipeline using this, it cannot deploy it into the QA or prod or any other environment. So let's now, okay, so this particular part we are going to add the Python notebook to the repo, because essentially you will be working on a Python notebook. That notebook will be added to the repository, and from that repository, when your build process happens, this notebook will also be compiled and sent to the release pipeline. So in order for this to be done, what you need to do, you need to enable the build agent, and in this build agent it is going to give the sample Python notebook, which is this notebook, right? And in this notebook, what we are going to use, we are going to add this notebook.py file to the notebook folder, and I'm going to show you where it is added. So this is essentially your notebook. In this notebook you have created a function with the source data, and it is going to create a source data, and then this is expected data, and it is going to assert it. And then you are going to use this unit test with the verbosity 2 so that it can this outputs the result. So first let's see where we have to copy these files in the Git. Okay, so here what we have done, we have created a specific structure in the Azure in the GitHub, so that when we run this build pipeline, it can pick those values from the specific location. So let me show you what does it do. So first is your libraries/python/ this is a path dbx demo. In that we have added these three files. First is your add column code, testing add column code. This is a real add column code. Let me show you. We have just seen it, but I'm just showing it here. And then your setup information. How do we set it up? So this is how the setup works in Python. You are going to use this name, version, and package. And then this is another library. Like this is how the whole code will be set up. And then we have also added a notebooks. So this is our demo notebook, dbx demo notebook, and this is the notebook which we are going to run as a part of our testing. Okay, so let's start the demo and see the whole process in action. So this is my Azure DevOps pipeline, and whatever I have just shown you, including my VM image of Ubuntu, the Python installation, the Databricks, the Python libraries installation, these are the variables which we have created. So these variables, I'm going to show you how to get these variables created here, and then how do we set up the values of these variables. This is how do we download the files from the remote repository and the build agent. And this is how the unit testing is done on the Python. So this is the whole process. And once this is done, then the build, publishing the test result happens. And once the publishes happen, then we are going to actually package this Python code into the Python wheel. And this is the whole process of packaging the Python code. And finally, once we reach there, then what we are going to do, this part of the script, we are going to actually generate the deployment artifact. And this deployment artifact will be used from the build agent. Okay. And this deployment artifact will be used to, have this Python notebook, which we have just shown you, Python wheel libraries, right, which is generated as a part of the build process, and then some release settings, right, and all this thing along with the summary of the test result, which we just completed in this step, it is going to go here, and that summary will be created in the XML file. So in this case, we are going to use git diff to find out the difference of the files which are added in the most recent git merge. That means when we merge it, what are the latest part of the merge which added there, and then we will use the Python wheel to just do this distribution part and then create a release artifact. So for this, what we are going to do, git diff, and this is a git command. Okay, this is a standard git command. So, and this git command is actually working on the build binary directory. Okay, so essentially it is creating these directories. So in this case, library Python lib, then CI/CD script, and then it is creating the notebook library. This is notebook directory, and it is essentially copying this specific set of files. Like the libraries, it is copying here, and libraries it is copying from the library/python/lib, and then it is copying it here. Similarly for notebooks, it is copying it in the here from CI/CD script in the notebooks, and if you see, it is copying so I have just shown you these in here. If you see, this is exactly the same structure. So here it is libraries Python and then dbx demo, right? And similarly, if you see notebooks, and then there is a CI/CD script. So what it is doing is, it is actually copying these files from these particular locations and copying it into the build agent here. And in that build agent, it is finding it out first of all the differential version, so that it can copy the things which is recently merged, and then it is copying it into these locations. So first it is creating the CI/CD script directory, and then it is copying from that CI/CD script to this one. And similarly, we are creating a notebook, and it is copying from that notebook location to this one, right? Then finally, once that is done, then it is going to archive these files in the zip, right? And after archiving, it is going to create a artifact named build artifact and publish it into the build artifact. Publish this as a build artifact. So why we create this build Databricks build artifact? Because this is going to be picked up by the release pipeline for the release purpose. Now the most important part of this code is here, Databricks environment variables. So first, where we are going to create the environment variable, we have created it here, and these are the value of the environment variable. So look it very carefully. Databricks address is found here, which is nothing but your Databricks workspace address here. And then if you see Databricks API token, how do we create API token? So it is created with a user token like this. You come here, and then in that you create user setting and then generate a token. So once you generate a token, name of the token and generate, and whatever token comes, you will copy the token. It is only visible once, and then after that you will copy it here. And Database cluster ID, your cluster ID is nothing but your cluster here, this is your cluster ID. So this is exactly, it is shown here, cluster ID. So in this case it is 0404, the number. This is org ID, I'm sorry, this is org ID which I have just shown you. Similarly the cluster ID will be shown. I'm going to show you cluster ID. So once you create a compute cluster here, and unfortunately nothing is there, but I will create it and show you. So then once you select that cluster, it will show you the cluster ID here. Okay, so that is how the cluster ID is created. And then the port for Databricks is 15001. Because since I have already created a cluster ID at the time of creating a cluster, so that was the ID I was using, but then I deleted it. But when I create a new cluster, then the cluster ID will be different. So you need to update this cluster ID there. So in here, I have already started the cluster creation process. And if you see it here, the cluster information is cluster ID is given here. So this is the cluster ID which you are going to use here for your cluster. So if I'm going to use this cluster, I'm going to use this, change this cluster ID. And what is going to be the new cluster ID? This is a new cluster ID. So I will have to remove this cluster ID and change it to this cluster ID and save. So now I think we are ready with all these changes. And now I'm going to show you how this whole build pipeline runs. Now we have done all this configuration, we have understood this pipeline. So now let's run this pipeline and see what happens. So we are going to run this pipeline. So this pipeline is queued now, job is running, and it will show you all the steps which we have just configured. Okay, so now when we ran this pipeline, it automatically gone through all the steps, like using the installing the Python version, loading the dependencies, configuring the Databricks Connect, check out the code from the GitHub repo, run the unit test on the Python code, publish the test results, and these test results are here, right? And then if you want, you can just check these test results here. These are the test results, right? And then it gives you the Python wheels, get the changes, and then finally archive, that means tar, create a tar file, and then publish the build artifact, and then check out the code. So this is how the whole process works. And if you see this, this is shown that it is successfully done. So with this, we have completed the successful build process. Now I will see you in the next session where we are going to develop the release process. Okay. Thanks for watching, and do not forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't